Do you ever wonder what happened to your friends from high school? I mean, you were so close. You laughed together, you cried together, you shared some of the best years of your lives together. And yet, somehow through life, you just lost touch. Now it's time to relive those moments once again. Introducing the podcast that takes you back in time to the place where it all began. This is Class Reunion. We're bringing you all the gossip, secrets, and scandals from your high school days that you won't want to miss. Join us as we catch up with old classmates and dive into the wildest stories from our high school days. From those legendary parties to the infamous cliques, we're spilling all the tea on who's who and what really went down. So grab a seat, turn your volume up, and get ready for a trip down memory lane. Class Reunion, the podcast that reunites us all.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Class Reunion. I am excited about my guest today. I have been waiting to speak with him for a variety of reasons, but I'm thrilled to have Eric Daniel on. He's a wonderful husband, father, but most importantly, an excellent screenwriter, and he will be having his first debut in the theaters August 18th. So I'm very excited and proud of what he has accomplished in LA and looking forward to talking to him about it. So welcome, Eric. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Good to see you.
For everyone's benefit, either who don't know Groves or you and I in our relationship, you were a year younger. God bless you. And but we both went to Groves together. And I just asked if you talked to my mom a lot there, and you said yes. So I definitely look forward to talking to people in your class because we all were in it together, and I remember a lot of your classmates. And currently the 40th is going on for my upperclassmen, and so you're 2 years behind, so buckle up and get ready, buddy.
Right. Yeah, am I 2 years behind you or 1 year behind you?
No, but you'll be it's the 40th is now for 83. I'm next year, and then you'll be next.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
We're a year, but the 1983 is in Birmingham, Michigan right now celebrating. It's a 5-day event. Okay. Oh, we're not going to be able to pull that off.
Get ready. Get my mind ready for that.
Yeah.
See if I can make it out.
So I was recalling going back in the yearbook for sure. And man, every sport you played, baseball, football, basketball, you were on all three.
Yeah.
And you were on varsity.
Yeah. I think baseball, I tailed off I think I stopped after my junior year just because I was like, kind of over it. But football and basketball for sure. Football was really my thing. Yeah. So I just really had a great time with that at Groves. And we had a really great group, great team last year I was there and my senior year. And I played a lot, with varsity on junior year as well. So I think a couple guys in your grade had injuries. So I kind of moved up a little bit and had some big moments. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I always talk to a few of the people I've already interviewed about the Pontiac Silverdome, which A, was classic because it's no longer there. And B, to play in, our NFL team's stadium was got to be cool for a high school kid.
No, it was awesome. And that I think was like my big kind of, breakthrough into like varsity because I played a little bit here and there. I think Dennis Rauda was in your grade, right? He was a linebacker ahead of me, and he had some injuries with his knee, and it was unfortunate for him. But I remember like that Silverdome game was like one of my first games starting, and I think I made the first tackle on a kickoff and the first tackle on defense. And just to hear your name,
oh God, yes,
where the Lions played, like you're kind of floating a little bit. So
for sure.
I think I had a fumble recovery for a touchdown in my junior year, so that kind of really kind of jazzed me up a little bit to be ready for senior year.
And we all went to the games. I mean, it was universal. Every group didn't matter. Like we religiously went to those football games, and the sound of that must have been incredible too.
Yeah. And I'm a Lions guy. I'm a Detroit sports fan guy. So, I mean, I remember seeing the Pistons in the Silverdome. So, that was awesome.
Oh,
we're playing and we're playing Seaholm, which is our rival. So it was like, you didn't have to really work too hard to get ready for that. So
yeah.
That was awesome. Yeah.
Was there any moment that sticks out in high school, good or bad, that you remember? So when you think about Groves, and we talked about this a little bit, it's like part of the whole reason we're doing this is you just forget and you move on in your adult life. And it's like all of a sudden to go back and go, oh my gosh, I do remember this event or this happened or this party. So if you have any of those to share.
Yeah, I mean, look, I really enjoyed Groves. That was a great time, in high school, and just the friends you make and all the the connections that kind of last you the rest of your life. So I really have a lot of really good memories. I mean, both from football and sports and all that. In terms of like social stuff, I mean, there was a lot of really good parties. In fact, I had a pretty legendary party myself that it's funny to still talk about it now because parents and my mom was out of town and
of course
I lived on Lasser across from Country Day, and somehow like the word got out about it and literally like everybody came. I mean, not just Groves, but several other schools were there, and it just got way out of control. I remember a couple of guys wrestling and putting a hole in my wall, and it just went all the way through the night to just ridiculous, to the point where like when I went to Michigan State, I was meeting people who were like, oh wait, I was at your party at such and such date, and like it just was pretty legend for a while.
How much trouble did you get in?
A little bit, like, it was one of those all-nighters where you like, all your friends who are still hanging around, like go to the store or wherever's open, get some cleaner. We gotta, but it was pretty evident. I mean, my mom was, she was a working mom and out there, and I think she was traveling in New York for business and all that, and came back, and there was some evidence of it, but we did a pretty good job of cleaning up. But that was like the one big kind of blowout I had that, like, I mean, I'm not kidding. I met people for a long time who were like, I didn't know from high school, but that showed up that night. So
that
was one. But I remember probably junior, sophomore year, because I used to hang out with a bunch of guys like Perry Richards and, Sean Dunleavy, who passed, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. Gucciardi and I used to be really tight back then. Mm-hmm. Paul Rice-Tech, all these guys, Mark Karcher, and, we would do... there would be no place to go, right? You want to go drink and go hang out. So for a while, like, because I lived across from Country Day, they had these trails down there, right? Yeah. So somebody would get somebody to go buy beer, and we'd all go just sit and like drink in the woods, basically. And that was like with the spot, but it was like this little kind of hidden, kind of oasis. To go
mine was Beverly Park, and what we would do is, remember the Bartles and James was gross.
Those flying coolers, yeah.
Well, yeah. And we would buy them early, and then we would stick them under the trees at the park, and then come back. I mean, we drank them warm, which is disgusting, but yeah, that's what we did. We'd stash it off for later, and then we'd show up at the park and drink there. So those trails are always a good spot.
Yeah. Because I mean, if you had no house to go to, if someone's parents weren't away that week or whatever, that's what you would do, right? So
and all the people that sold to us, come on, I mean, that would never happen today. The Blondie die,
not like that. Well, everybody had like an older sibling or a friend with a brother or whatever, and But even back then, see, my year, what was great was I was 1967, right? So it was super easy to take the pencil and turn it into a 2 on our old license because it wasn't like laminated or whatever. You put a little hairspray on it, right?
Yes.
So, if you had skills, you could literally do it in a couple seconds and walk in and go buy beer or coolers or whatever, So that was like the 67 to a 2, 62. I'm like, to the point where I think it was permanently a 2 for a long time in my license. Yeah.
Well, do you remember Tally Hall, I think it was called, in Bloomfield?
Yeah, like the food court thing.
Yeah, there was a photo shop thing, and that's where you got all your fake IDs made. So I had a fake ID, and I got it from Tally Hall. It was easy, and how stupid is that? But it worked. So you were kind enough to say nothing's off limits. What I would love to explore, because I can't speak to it, is what it was like to be in a predominantly white school system. How did that impact you, and both good and bad? I would love to know your perspective.
It's all good, for the most part, just because, first of all, you're just a kid and you just want to like have fun and be like everyone else. I mean, I came to Birmingham, I think I was in 3rd grade. I ended up going to Bingham Farms, and I lived in Detroit before then. And, my mom and dad, my mom and stepdad were together and both working lawyers and all that. And the schools were so bad in Detroit at the time that they had sent me to Roper, private school, which was already kind of out in the burbs. And it was like, if we're spending this money to send them out to there, why don't we just move out to the suburbs, right? So that's how I ended up in Birmingham, and my parents and my little sister and I, so ended up at Bingham Farms. And, at that age, I mean, 3rd grade, you're just like trying to like fit in and hang out. And that's kind of what I did, and met a lot of really good friends then that still like lasted all the way through high school and college. But it's always a little different when you're not like everybody else. There's stuff that comes up more or less like definitely toward like high school age where, you know, you have to kind of, you know, be reminded sometimes of that. So, you know, like our high school only had, a handful of black kids at that time. So that was always a unique kind of thing. Yeah. So, you know, I never had like, I can't say that I had like direct hardcore like racism in my face, but, you know, every now and then certain words would drop and you'd be like, you know, not in a way that it was like attacking, but there was just a lot of ignorance, you know? So there'd be phrases or something that would be said, and I'd have to call attention to that, you know? And you know, it's one of those things where like you're hanging out with somebody who you consider a friend, and then somebody says something and it reminds you that you're a little bit different, right? So that was common, that kind of experience. I'd say every, you know, few weeks you would hear something like that. And I would always bring it up, but that wasn't like the point where anybody like directed it at me, because that would have been like fights for real, like back then. You know, I never had that kind of situation, but you know, I would think anyone in that situation, Black, Asian, Latin, gay, whatever, growing up in that kind of situation, you know, you get a little more guarded, right? So, and in that sense, I was always kind of aware, you know, so it was, I mean, that was always kind of the unique little difference. And I also knew, like, you know, at that point in high school, I mean, my mom was a single mom, working mom, and I was like, you know, I kind of stayed out of trouble, and sports was a big way to help me do that. I mean, I definitely had my parties and drinking days and all that, but I didn't want to be a black kid who was like causing trouble in school, and, you know, and I want to represent my mom that way. And I don't want to be that kind of, you know, image of, you know, the troubled black kid. You know, I was always kind of aware of that. And it would be funny sometimes too, like, you know, if there was like a new student, somebody's like, oh, you got to meet such and such. You guys should hang out. You guys should date. And I'm like, we should date? Like, okay, there must be a new black girl in school. But I didn't want to be like, you know, the soap opera, one black couple, you know, like that was not my thing, you know, to like, you know, be what everybody kind of wanted or expected. So probably unfairly, because, you know, I'm sure there was a lot of cool people I should have hung out with more, but it's just one of those things that stuck with me.
Yeah. I value it because I was looking back, of course, reminiscing in the yearbook, and I was like, this is just so pasty white. It had to have been incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
But the interesting part is, from my naive perspective, and I think a lot of us shared that, we didn't get the challenges because we didn't really notice it. It was just a very interesting thing to look back and say, gosh, I didn't look at Eric as the black kid in school. I knew Eric Daniel. But I mean, truly, I feel dumb looking back going, God, I didn't give him enough grace or compassion to realize what a unique situation he was in. I just knew he was my football player on varsity.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah. And that's the thing. Like, you know, first of all, like, I don't think anybody really necessarily wanted to feel that way. Like, you know, I was very popular, had a lot of friends in the homecoming court and, you know, sports and all that.
Right.
But, you know, you do know, like, just dating I remember dating a girl, and her father never spoke to me like the whole time we dated. Like, we went out for months or whatever, and like wouldn't say hello, wouldn't acknowledge me. And, you know, that was like in your face. Like for an example, like I remember going to a prom, another school's prom, a girl's prom. I think it was a prom or a homecoming or something. And this is how bad it was. And this like sounds terrible in hindsight, but this was like actually, you know, a thing. Like, I was her date, and it was, you know, all white girls and everything. It was a group of people, and we took pictures with like 4 or 5 couples. And then we all got in a limo, and then like on the way to where we were going, like we made a stop. And one of the other dates got out of the car, and then another guy got in, a black guy got in. And then we kept going to the party, and like no one ever really said anything. I'm like, wait a minute, like that was her boyfriend, the black guy. The other guy was like a shill. Took pictures with the families, and like they didn't know who she was dating, and like it was just okay that like we swapped in this random white guy. But she was, her boyfriend was, you know, so like that sounds insane, and that's like the kind of stuff that but like I should probably literally like write about stuff like that, because it happened, and like no one else notices that, but as for me, I'm like, this is kind of messed up, you know. So that kind of stuff always resonated. You know, it never was something that I considered like an obstacle, but I was aware of it. So, you know, so many great friends, or, you know, white friends from high school in Michigan State, that's who I am and who I grew up with. But, you know, of course, my family doesn't look like that, and, you know, and all that in Detroit and all around. And so it was just kind of this dichotomy. You kind of got used to switching, you know, and being in different environments. And even at Michigan State, like I knew I was never going to go join a fraternity, because I wasn't going to join a white fraternity. But I didn't feel comfortable being solely in a black fraternity as well, just because of, you know, where I went to school. So for better or worse, I mean, that was the choice I made.
That's what I was going to ask you, Eric. and that's such an interesting thing. Like, you didn't feel like you belonged solely in one or the other, because I would imagine you also were teased within the Black community, like, oh, you're Mr. White Suburb now.
Yeah, I'd say that only happened on the football field, really. Like when we played a Black school, I would hear it a little bit, but it just kind of made me want to play even better. I mean, what are you going to do? That's just kind of who you are.
Right. A little jab and you move on, and that.
Yeah. And I just think the question, like for me, it was always like, something that you wouldn't have to deal with or anyone, else is like, if you get rejected for something, whether it's a date or, a teacher or whatever, there's a little thing in your back of your head. Is that a factor because of, what I look like is different than what everybody else looks like, right? So, am I being treated differently in that sense? You don't think about it too much until something jumps out at you. Groves was, for the most part, everybody was, I think, a little bit more conscious maybe than some places, but it would never, every now and then something would happen and I'd just be like, this is messed up. And, that's not cool to say that or whatever it is. I mean, to the point where, like, literally, I think there were people that didn't know I was Black. I mean, I'm much more tanner than everybody else, but like at Michigan State, there was like people that I didn't know at all. And guys are like, wait, you don't know? Can't tell that? So that's a weird thing. Sometimes we get to like, what are you? That kind of thing. So, I look Latin, I look Hawaiian or whatever it was. But, even when I went to, this is funny, but even when I went to New York and started working for Spike Lee's crew, there was a couple guys named Eric, and my nickname was Hawaiian Eric because I guess I looked Hawaiian to them.
Interesting.
Whatever it was. So, but it was funny. I mean, I embraced it and just kind of ran with it. So that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you do the contrast with your children then? And is it also a little less shocking? Because, I mean, LA is a melting pot, right? So, but you still have to have that subject of race. But was it different than how you were raised?
It's, it's always different. I mean, look, our kids are growing up in a much more aware environment, especially with social media. But LA is different in the sense of like I lived in New York for a long time after college, and New York is, of course, super diverse, and groups kind of have to kind of come together. Where LA is like you're in your car, you drive to your house, you go to work, and people don't interact as much. And there are different groups, and LA's got a very different culture in the sense of like there's Black culture, there's Latin, mostly Mexican culture, there's white neighborhoods and all that, and it just doesn't interact as much as it should. And my wife is Puerto Rican, which is, of course, in New York, prevalent, but in LA, it's not. So, we've got Black Puerto Rican kids going to LA schools that are predominantly either, a mixture of everybody, but the Latin side is mostly Mexican. So and my kids' names are Lucia and Mateo. So it's pretty much assumed most of the time that they're Mexican until they meet them and know who they are, which is fine. But it's just a different thing. And Blacks and Latins in LA don't necessarily naturally connect like they do in New York, which is just a different thing.
So let's talk about New York. Did you go directly from Michigan State to New York, or?
I did, yeah.
Is that where you met Tracy, your wife?
I did, yeah. I was getting into entertainment. I mean, I always knew I wanted to get into entertainment, which actually, it's funny because this goes back to Groves, because really, I'm going to go way back first. When I really first learned that I really was attracted to it, I remember it was the last term senior year, and me and my friend Perry Richards were looking at an elective. We had to take an elective just to fill out. And I had no idea. I just learned looking at it that there was a TV studio in Groves High School. So there was like a TV production class. And I'm like, okay, cool, let's take that. And I took that class, and that's one of those stories that's really strange because I loved it. I loved the class. It really kind of sparked it for me. And, I just started getting really creative, and most kids were doing like interviews and little talk shows or whatever. Yeah. And I was like, wrote first of all, I did a whole MTV, right? So not only do we have like the music video VJs, but I did 3 music videos. So Perry and I did like Easy Lover. I did, a We Are the World video where we used like 20 of our classmates. And, we had hosts, Renee Sharon and Craig Ehrlich, who got married and have a beautiful family. They were our VJs. So I did all that. And that's one of those situations where I had a teacher who really did not support that and didn't see that in me. And it's one of the things that I was always wondering, is there an issue there? Because then I wrote like a murder mystery that I was shooting, and I wrote something else. So this was the crazy thing, and this might have been one of the times where I ran into your mom in the office, was I remember we had some classes that were in the TV studio and some that were in the classroom, and it would switch up, and I would always get mixed up. And I was pretty habitually tardy all the time anyway, but I had like the maximum amount of tardies, and I went to the studio instead of the classroom. But I was like deep into that class. I was doing some really, big stuff at that time for that age group. And I was in the middle of shooting like the murder mystery, and I went to the studio instead of the class, and by the time I got to class, it was like my last tardy. And then the teacher was like, that's it. You're whatever, kicked out, go see the principal. And I was just pissed because I was like, I remember like literally the first script that I wrote was for that group. And I think for that class. And I think she gave me like a D because she said I was trying to do too much, basically. It was too ambitious or whatever it was. Right. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like I just like wrote like, I know. So like it was just a weird thing, right? So I slammed the door and I think it bounced back open. I just cursed her out. Like I laid in, as I'm walking down the hall, I'm like,
yeah,
B word, whatever.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And then I remember I got stopped in the hallway because the other teacher heard me, and it was Mr. Buck, who was my favorite teacher, and he was also my defensive
awesome.
coach.
Yes.
So, and Major Court Cases was literally my favorite class the whole time. Mm-hmm. So if there was ever a really positive teacher for me at Groves, it was Mr. Buck. And I just saw him as like, because I only played defense in football, he was like, such a great kind of role model for me. So he kind of calmed me down. But by the time I got to the office, that was it. Like she had heard what I said, and I ended up getting kicked out of, I never finished that class. I got like what do you call it? Incomplete or whatever.
Incomplete.
So the one thing that I was really, really good at and like excelling at, like she didn't let me back in the class. And like that kind of in a weird way fueled me because I liked it, but I didn't get the support in that class from that particular teacher. But I was like, screw this. I'm going to keep going after that. So
I smell some premiere tickets to that teacher and have her come.
Right, exactly. It's like, you want to find those kids who are like really into it and like not knock them for trying to do other stuff. But so when I went to Michigan State, I already kind of had like an inkling that I wanted to get into that. So when I was a communications major, I started working in the television production side right away, and did some really cool stuff there. There was a show that started when I was there that I think literally still runs on MSU. At MSU, it's called The Show, but it was like set up in a kid's dorm room and all that. And met a lot of friends there working on that. So that was like the TV production side. And then when my family had moved, my sister had moved to New York.
Okay.
So
that's what prompted it.
Summers,
okay.
Yeah. So in the summers, I was going to New York City. And one summer, I think after my sophomore year, I interned at NBC, which was like, just working up there in like by Letterman Studios and the Today Show and all
Love
that.
It.
But then I had heard, which was cool. It wasn't really my thing, but it was like being almost like a page there. But then I had heard about Spike Lee when I was there that summer, and like someone had told me about him, and he's doing more movies and stuff. And he had just made his first couple of movies. So when I went back to Michigan State, I made some contact and just started sending out resumes and like letters and stuff. And they called me and said, next time you're in New York, why don't you come into the office for an interview? And I went out there and like, it's funny because you're like kind of trained to go, in a suit and all that. But when you get into like the entertainment world, it's like free for all, right? It's just whatever, everybody's doing. So I showed up in my suit and there was a couple other people trying to look all good. And they were like, yeah, okay, you're hired. We're making a movie this summer. And when you get out of school, let us know and you'll be there. So I was an intern. I wasn't making any money at first. It was just straight out of my junior year at Michigan State. I went to New York and started working on Do the Right Thing as an intern. And it just was such an eye-opening thing. So yeah, it was great. And like, who knew, right? Like, not only was it my first film experience, but to end up being on this film that's such a iconic part of like cinema history, right? So
yes, you were right there in the beginning, forefront. Like that's. I'm not in your field, but it just does seem like sometimes there's those serendipitous connections that just launch people, and
absolutely,
it's what makes it like the great American dream. And then there are those that are super talented that didn't have those connections that think like, gosh, why not me? It must be so hard.
Well, it's a hard field to break into, definitely. Yeah. But what I found back then, and if you want it and you work at it and you're good at it and you put in the time, it pays off. So
right.
I worked on Do the Right Thing, met a lot of. I mean, it's funny because a lot of people from that particular crew and subsequent Spike Lee movies, I still am really good friends with, and they're
nice.
Some of them are in LA, some are still in New York, but they're producing, they're writing, they're directing, they're acting. And, like, I mean, literally, like, Ruth Carter was the wardrobe designer. She's won 2 Oscars now for Black Panther. So, I mean, there's just people who have done legendary things that we worked with who were like, it was like a family. And, of course, for Spike, it was all about providing opportunities for people that didn't usually get those opportunities. So we had extremely diverse group. I mean, it was, a lot of Black crew members who didn't get those opportunities. Even like just at that time, it was very hard just to get into union jobs, like as a camera person or a lighting person or, the grips and all that. So he always made sure every department was populated with a diverse crew. And, whether they were production assistants or interns or just like the third grip or whatever, it would be like someone who's Black or Latin or whatever. And it was a super diverse mix. And that was the kind of boost he provided for people, like just, putting them in that position. And for me, like I had already kind of started in the idea of maybe going to film school, but then I realized like I was going to the set. I had like the dailies of what we were going to shoot that day, the script pages. So I like kind of visualize in my mind. I would be on set. Sometimes I'd be like a stand-in for someone, and I'd be like right there watching them shoot the scene with Spike and his great cinematographer Ernest Dickerson, and like really see that. And then the end of the day, he did something that was really kind of rare. Was it would be like a little shuttle van that if you wanted to go see the footage from the day before, you could go see it, right? So I did that every day, and a lot of us did. We would just go and have a beer and go watch these actors, Danny Aiello and Ozzie Davis and Sam Jackson and, just amazing, John Turturro, amazing performances. Literally every scene, every piece of footage, right? Like we would see every take. And I'm like, okay, so now I understand how he's making this movie. Like, I see the script pages, I see how they shoot it, I see raw footage, and I'm like, this is how it's done. So that became film school for me, right? You need someone to show you that something's possible, right? So I think he made everyone feel like this is possible, especially if you're Black and then trying to get in the industry and all that. So we were all making like short films and music videos and stuff like on the side, like after that, and if I made a short film and I would call guys from the crew who worked in every department who came out for free for a weekend and helped out. And, I mean, like I said, my wife, I mean, we met, she was a casting associate. She did all the extras casting, I think, for Spike from Do the Right Thing to Malcolm X, like 4 movies and bang, bang, bang. He was making a movie every year, which was great because when I graduated from Michigan State, I went right to working on Spike's next movie, Mo Better Blues. So we already had this kind of relationship as a family to work together. And then my wife, Tracy, we started dating after Mo Better, I think. And then like when I came out here to LA, she came out about halfway through and then left for permanently about a year later. But, we both didn't have any connections here really, but the doors were opening and the opportunities were there. And she had stopped working as a casting director. She started acting. So, we both just we were a little bit ignorant in the sense of like, no one told us we can't do this. So we just kind of did it. Right. And for me, what happened was I had made a short film and, like a lot of people were doing, and I, just kind of put it out in film festivals. It did very well. It won some awards and stuff. And Tracy, who's my girlfriend then, had met a producer and she was like, oh, you should show him you should look at my boyfriend's film, whatever. And he looked at it and he was like, hey, that's pretty good. You should write a feature. And this will tell you how long ago it was. He was looking for something for the rap group Crisscross. So remember the kids with like the backwards pants,
for sure.
And like, jump and all that, right? So I was like, okay, I've always been like, if somebody tells me a little something like, here's an opportunity, I'm going to just jump at it, right? I'm going to go for it. So I literally went away and like wrote a script with like these 2 kids as leads, and I based it on the fact that like when I was growing up in Michigan, my mom had become a juvenile court judge even when we lived in Birmingham, but she was still working with kids. Yeah, well, she was working with kids in Detroit, and to the point where like some kids were coming through that were kind of bad in the system, and it was just burnt her out. But she took one kid who she saw a lot of potential in, and for like a while, he came and stayed with us in Birmingham. Like he lived with us for months, and it was just like a good experience, and it kind of opened my eyes a little bit. It gave me another person that looked like me to kind of reflect off of. So I took that scenario and I wrote my first screenplay, and I took the 2 kids and made them leads, and they both had different information about stuff that's going on in their areas, and it was a crime that was going on. And they both, when they came together, they kind of figured out this little crime mystery of who was bringing drugs into Canada from Detroit, right? So that was the first script that I wrote. That was the little drug smuggling ring that they kind of knew people on both sides of who were involved. And these kids figured out a little mystery, right? So like like a Black Hardy Boys kind of thing.
I was just going to say that. That's so funny you said that. Yeah.
And that's kind of the first feature that I wrote. And by the time I wrote it, like Crisscross wasn't as hot as they were. So he was like, just send it out to some places, and friends that told me about different programs. And I sent it out to Disney. And, you know, I was working in New York. At that point, I was doing mostly music videos and commercials as an assistant director. And I thought that would be my path to stay in New York and work in indie film. And then that script got the attention of Disney, and they said, why don't you fly out for an interview for this fellowship program, a writer's fellowship program. So I flew out, still didn't really think anything was going to happen with it. Had a really good interview, which is another crazy story, because on my interview, the taxi came and picked me and another writer up, and it was supposed to take us to Disney Studios, and it took us to Disneyland, like literally the theme park, like an hour away. So we missed our interview, right? So I know, we flew all the way out from New York. I was like on a red eye the next day because I had a music video I was going to do, but they were like, oh, you know, where are you guys? I'm like, we're at Disneyland. And, you know, like, what are you doing there? I'm like, we're not doing rides, just trying to find you guys. So the fact that I kind of, like, the other writer was kind of bitter and she wasn't happy about it, but I just kind of played it off, and everybody kind of, like, you know, responded to me well that I handled that experience well, and I ended up having a good interview. And I remember the cab ride back, because I flew out that night. The cab ride from Disney Studios, I had my suitcase with me, and to the airport was the first time as we're driving through like LA and the hills where I was like, I think I'm going to move to LA. Like, this is going to happen. Like, it didn't really hit me until then.
Really?
And sure enough, like, you know, yeah, like, you know, I mean, because, you know, you're on one track, right? You think,
well, and New York is great. You're having great opportunities. So it wasn't like you were starving for it. You were already in the entertainment industry. Yeah.
Yeah, no question. Yeah. I mean, I was actually making more money as an AD than I made that first year in that program, but it was an opportunity. So, and I came out here, and fortunately I had an idea in my head already about what I wanted to write, and I had already started researching it. So in my interview, I pitched that idea, and I think they responded to it as well. So a few months later, you know, they hired me, and I had a 1-year program to come to LA. Still thinking I'd go back to New York and work in film there, but
you had this in you. You actually have had this in you.
Yeah.
Like, your ability to write and tell stories has been something from back in high school. Like, that's amazing. It just seems to be very part of your DNA.
That's what kind of came from. And I mean, even my first short film was from a short story I had written while I was in a creative writing class at Michigan State. So, you know, and when you start to see results from something that you like to do, and people are responding, or your short film is winning awards or whatever it is, you're like, wait a minute, this is something that I'm kind of a little good at. So, So then, you know, I came out to LA, and I had 1 year, and we were supposed to write 2 screenplays, but I knew what I wanted to write. And, you know, for me as a writer, it's always easier to write what you like, what you enjoy, what you know. And I've always liked baseball. I've always been interested in Black history, right? So
I was going to get to that.
I remember, well, for me, that's what it was. And it was like,
number 42.
I remember I was watching an interview. Yeah, I was watching an interview about, I was like the history of Jackie Robinson or whatever. It was his anniversary of him crossing the color line, and they were talking to different players, and everybody was respectful. But there was one player, Vince Coleman, who was kind of like, he doesn't mean nothing to me, right? Like, he didn't have any connection. Like, I can't say anything about Jackie Robinson. I'm like, this dude right here has no idea what Jackie Robinson went through. What about if a guy like that was put in this position? How would he react? And that's when, like, the light bulb moment came on. So that was my first script I wrote for a studio when I was in that program. It was Brushback, and it was a modern day cocky major league Black baseball player with a lack of respect for the history of the game, you know, and also a little friction with his father about the way that he plays. He gets hit by a pitch and knocked unconscious, and when he wakes up, it's 1945. He's on the Kansas City Monarchs in the old Negro baseball leagues alongside Satchel Paige and Jackie Robinson, these legends, where he's this cocky guy who thinks modern day ways and does modern day stuff. And now he's put in this position with guys who never got any of that money or fame. So that was my pitch. That was my first script. And I had researched it. Like, even when I came across country, I had stopped in Kansas City and met some of the Negro League players and went to the museum. And so I was ready. Like, I really, you know, kind of knew that world. And I wrote that script, which basically was like, you know, I always wanted to write light, fun stuff. It was like Back to the Future meets Field of Dreams. And that's what the script was. As my 1 year was ending, I just focused. I was supposed to write a second script, but I was like, I'm focusing on this because I have something. And I had another year where I could still I had a year where I could shop the script around and try to make something happen. Otherwise, it went back to Disney like forever. So that's when I just like picked up the phone and hit up all production contacts that I had. And it just kind of started from there. And fortunately, I worked in a lot of music videos. I got it to John Singleton's company, the late director. Yes. And I had also, my wife Tracy and I had worked with Will Smith's company on music videos. So we got it to Will Smith's company, and independently, they both loved it. So at one point, Will Smith and John Singleton had a meeting, and somehow my script came up, and they both knew it, and they were like, they wanted to work on it together. And this, again, will tell you how long ago it was. Will was just coming off of Fresh Prince, and I think Bad Boys had come out, but Independence Day hadn't come out yet. So this is how long ago this was. Anyway, they loved it. John Singleton was blowing up. So the first call I got was like that real kind of Hollywood moment phone call where they were like, Sony wants to option your screenplay. John Singleton's going to produce and maybe direct, and Will Smith is going to star. And I'm like, let's go. I'm in, whatever. Let's do it. So Eric. That was like, that was about 6 months after the program ended. And that was my first script option sale. So, that movie like had a long life in development. And, I was a really young writer, at the time. So they, as Hollywood tends to do, they would hire other writers. I did my rewrites, and then they hired other writers to come on and do rewrites. And then it didn't go at Sony. But Will Smith always loved that script. So when he got a deal at Fox, he took it with him with his deal to Fox. So then my script went from Disney to Sony to Fox. Fox had an option, which is like a rental period. And when that option was running out, they basically said, we're going to option again. And I was at a point where I was like, you know what? Can we maybe let it go? And I'll take there's other actors coming up now. If it doesn't go at Fox, maybe I could shop it around. So I was like, tell them to either let it go or buy it, thinking they would probably let it go, but they bought it, which is a nice big paycheck, which is great. The downside of that is that you really don't have any control over it anymore. So
that was going to be my follow-up question. Like when you sell your script, is it just then your hands are, that's it, you've released your baby, you
pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. It's on them. You've kind of given up the rights. You've taken the check, but still, like another director came on who's a friend of mine, Malcolm Lee, who directed eventually Girls Trip and a bunch of other movies. When he came on, he said, let's bring Eric back because they had hired other writers who had done some work, but they were like, we need to go back to the guy who did some work to it. So I did another pass on it down the road, and we came very close to getting that movie made. Ironically enough, Disney bought Fox Studios, so now it's owned by Disney again. So it's gone full circle. So who knows? It's still out there, and I've had conversations with them about it, but maybe one day.
I was disappointed because I remember following that journey. You were sharing that on Facebook, and I was bummed I was happy for you that it was sold, but I was like, I don't know what that's like to constantly sell scripts but not see them come to fruition.
Yeah.
There's a little frustration with that too.
Yeah.
Like it's great, like you said, the money's great, but you want to see it produced.
Yes, the check helps a lot, but you're an artist. So any art you do, you want people to see it.
So, you mentioned your script being sold, but then you were definitely in the graces of Disney again when you had Let It Shine.
Yes.
And that was fantastic.
Yes.
And it was weird for people that I knew whose kids were watching it. And I was like, but that was written by my friend. So Let It Shine was a very successful Disney program.
That was just a great experience. And, having to go through the whole process of having been a Disney fellow and then, kind of 360 coming back to Disney.
I hope you enjoyed the episode with Eric Daniel. We had so much to talk about that we will have a part 2 next week. We will dive further into the writer's strike and what the new streaming services have done to eliminate compensation for actors and directors once it's left television. It's a very important discussion. And we will also talk about his new release for Tiffany Haddish and Wesley Snipes and many, many more wonderful cast for Back on the Strip. It will be in our theaters August 18th and his first film debut. So we'll be talking about that. Very interesting. So I hope you join us. It's very enlightening. It's going to be a great discussion. We'll see you next week.